This is VOA Africa. Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory in for #WUWOT. It's Thursday, August the 8th. This is Africa 54. In the battle against Ebola, researchers in Uganda start a 2-year vaccine trial to fight the deadly virus. Africa 54's Paul Dio takes a closer look at modern popular uprisings on the continent. And we'll examine Ghana's efforts to boost cocoa farmers' incomes. We begin tonight with positive news in the fight against Ebola. Researchers in Uganda have launched a new trial for an Ebola vaccine. 800 health workers involved in the fight against the deadly virus are receiving doses of the two-part vaccine. Halima Thumani reports from Barara in western Uganda.
Researchers in Uganda said the new Ebola vaccine trial will take 2 years to complete. Dr. Juliet Mwanga, director of the Mbarara Research Center, says the vaccine combines antigens, a substance that induces an immune response in the body, from the Ebola virus, a common adenovirus, and the Yersinia Ankara vaccine. It's manufactured by the US-based Johnson & Johnson company.
This J&J vaccine aims at prevention, so it's primary prevention before you have contact at all. Yes, and the other difference, as I said, it has 2 parts. So you're given the first dose, and 56 days later you get another dose, which boosts your immunity. So hopefully it works for a longer time.
Currently, Uganda is using an Ebola vaccine by the Merck pharmaceutical company, but Mwanga says they need to try out new vaccines too. Uganda's move is motivated by its proximity to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where more than 1,800 people have died from the Ebola virus since August 2018. The new trial targets 800 health workers and frontline support workers who meet a few basic requirements.
Someone has to be 18 years and over. Then, of course, they have to be able to sign informed consent. Then they must not have been vaccinated with Ebola before, or they must not have suffered from Ebola before.
The researchers are hopeful the vaccine, if effective, will help Uganda and neighboring countries that have suffered through Ebola outbreaks. Uganda has seen no new cases of Ebola in recent weeks, but health officials have been on high alert since June when 2 adults and a 5-year-old boy who had crossed into Uganda from the DRC died of the virus. Halima Thumani for VOA News, Mbarara, Uganda.
The Kenyan government has issued birth certificates for 600 Shona people, part of a community of Christian missionaries who arrived from Zimbabwe in the 1960s. Here's Serena Chaudhry with the details.
A moment for celebration. More than 600 people from the stateless Shona community in Kenya have received birth certificates for the first time. A big step toward recognition and being able to access education and healthcare. Their forefathers arrived in East Africa from Zimbabwe as Christian missionaries in the 1960s, carrying passports from Rhodesia, what Zimbabwe was then known as, and registering as British subjects. But after Kenya's independence in 1963, the community had a 2-year window to register as Kenyans. Many of them missed it, rendering them stateless. Now, with their new birth certificates, they're hopeful life will be better.
Things will change. With this piece of paper, it will be easier for the community members to move to different places, and they can make a life for themselves. Just walking around with that paper will help.
Close to 19,000 stateless people are estimated to currently live in Kenya. Without proof of nationality, they're unable to fully access basic rights like education or health insurance. They also can't travel, own property, or be formally employed.
I believe now there is a genuine commitment on the part of the government, because the government realizes it has nothing to lose by giving citizenship to stateless people who are found on Kenyan territory, and it has a lot to gain on the contrary.
The Shona community number around 3,500 in Kenya. half are aged under 18.
Chowdhury of Reuters with that report. Now, still in Kenya, controversy erupted in the Kenyan parliament Wednesday when a female MP was removed for bringing her baby into the chamber. Zuleika Hassan says she brought her child with her due to an emergency and she did not want to miss her duties as a parliamentarian. Hassan was escorted out by security and was joined by a number of fellow female members of parliament who walked out with her. There has been mixed reaction from the Kenyan public over the incident. Some are calling her removal criminal, but others are calling her actions unprofessional. According to Kenya's Parliamentary House rules, strangers are not permitted within the chamber. The incident highlights a need to make parliaments friendlier for children and their parents. Now, demonstrations led by young adults, the unemployed professional organizations and religious groups are now a driving force for political change across Africa. Africa 54's Paul Ndiho explains.
Africa's political leaders are paying more attention to changes in their ranks due to popular uprisings, despite deadly crackdowns on pro-democracy protesters by government security services. In recent years, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, and Sudan have all witnessed major political changes due to sustained mass protests. After lengthy and difficult negotiations, Sudan's ruling military council and pro-democracy leaders signed a constitutional declaration on Sunday, paving the way for a transition to civilian rule after more than 7 months of demonstrations and violence. Under the agreement signed in the capital, Khartoum, a joint civilian-military ruling body will oversee the formation of a civilian government and parliament to govern for a 3-year transitional period, leading to democratic elections. Protest movement leader Ahmed Rabi signed the declaration at a ceremony attended by African Union and Ethiopian mediators. The declaration was the result of tense negotiations between the leaders of mass protests which erupted last December against 3-decade rule of President Omar al-Bashir and the generals who ousted him in April. Hundreds of people celebrated in the streets, dancing and chanting revolutionary songs, waving national flags and sounding horns. In Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, 95 years old, was forced to resign as president in November 2017. His resignation came a week after the army and his former political allies moved against him, ending decades of rule by a man who turned from independence hero to a typical strongman. Wild celebrations broke out in the capital Harare. People danced and cheered as they heard the news alongside members of the military. In the Gambia, a similar popular uprising in January 2017 triggered the exodus of longtime leader Yahya Jammeh after he refused to step down and hand over power to Adama Barrow, who had won the 2016 presidential election. Under Operation Restore Democracy, the Economic Community for West African States, or ECOWAS, decided to intervene militarily in the Gambia. The intervention ousted Jammeh, who had seized power in a 1994 coup and had vowed to rule the West African nation of 1.8 million people for 1 billion years. Before fleeing into exile in Equatorial Guinea, Jammeh ruled the Gambia with an iron fist, amassing unexplained wealth while the majority of the people lived in poverty. In his wake, Jammeh left a fleet of presidential planes and luxury cars. Now the government is looking to sell those items to raise millions of dollars for the country's health and education systems. In Burkina Faso 5 years ago, a popular revolt played out on the streets of the capital Ouagadougou as thousands of protesters and activists stormed the country's parliament as MPs prepared to vote to allow long-term ruling President Blaise Compaoré extend his 27-year rule. The mass demonstrations lasted 2 days and marked a turning point in the country's history, which ended with Compaoré being ousted and forced to flee. He currently resides in exile in neighboring Ivory Coast, where he has become a citizen. Ivory Coast refuses to extradite him back to Burkina Faso. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
The United States is now ready to remove Sudan from the state sponsors of terrorism list, according to Undersecretary for Political Affairs David Hale. Hale stated the U.S. position during a news conference Wednesday in Khartoum. The designation as a state sponsor of terrorism makes Sudan ineligible for debt relief and financing from lenders like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Removal from the list also potentially opens the door for foreign investment. Hale says that with a civilian-led government in Sudan, the U.S. could engage with the North African country on a number of issues. Now to West Africa, Nigerian technologist Chenenye Ude wants to ensure schoolgirls learn information and communication technology during summer. Ude says she is trying to boost gender parity in technology in Africa's most populous nation, where less than 20% of women are involved in the industry. Timothy Obiezu reports from Abuja.
At this tech-based facility in the city center, girls between the ages of 5 and 17 are spending their summer learning skills that include coding, animation, and robotics. The summer program, known as the Smart Girls Tech Camp, is the brainchild of Nigerian technologist Chinenye Ude. She says she's tackling gender inequality in Nigeria's tech sector with this project.
So what we are trying to do is that how can we get these girls abreast? How can we let them know that it's important that technology, they get involved in technology no matter how little. The knowledge is very important, both in their daily lives, in their business, and in their careers moving forward.
Women occupy less than a fifth of Nigeria's technology sector, according to the country's Statistics Bureau. The Smart Girls Tech program targets 1,000 young girls every year and prepares them for a future in technology. Tech expert and instructor Onyedinma Onyekachi says progress is being made.
From where we met them and where they are now is not the same. And we discovered that is as a result of psych. There was a notion that girls don't like tech. But we discovered that girls actually are enthusiastic about tech. It's just the approach, just the way technology is being introduced to them.
For young girls like aspiring animator Damilola Ojo, technology could be their access to a booming market dominated by men.
When I was younger, I was very interested in cartoons and the way they were made. So when I searched up, usually on YouTube, I looked at that it involved ICT, and so I became more and more interested.
10-year-old Ruby DK, who is more interested in robotics, says it could have several applications.
Let's say I'm able to program a robot that can help in the house. I'm able to program a robot that can control global warming.
Nigeria's ICT industry is among the biggest in Africa and keeps growing rapidly. It has evolved into a multi-billion-dollar industry within the last decade. Like many other sectors, however, it is characterized by low female representation. People like Ude are breaking boundaries with tech program for young girls. Although it could take a while before this translates into substantial female representation in the industry, it is making an impact on the girls. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Abuja.
Well, we're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, Ghana's efforts to make the cocoa industry more sustainable.
am Sheikh Asali, host and senior editor of VOA's international call-in talk show, Straight Talk Africa.
Today, we'll examine the tobacco industry.
We pretty much touch on anything that you can think of. Politics, health issues, human rights issues, you name it, we talk about it. The issues that we discuss are pertinent to most people on the African continent. A very, very rare and unique opportunity to interact with their leaders.
The lyrics could be French,
English,
Portuguese,
Bantu,
Arabic.
It is the beat.
The African beat that counts.
The beat does all the translations.
It cuts across all languages and gives us the understanding that this is the African beat.
It is so distinct
and adhesive.
It binds us together.
African beat on the Voice of America. For more information, visit our website at www.voanews.com/AfricanBeat.
I'm Clara Frank, and here's what's trending. Academics in Switzerland have created a robot which can teach itself to walk, roller skate, and even ice skate. SkaterBot, developed at the Department of Computer Science at ETH Zurich, can perform a complex number of moves using its agile legs. Parts are 3D printed. The robot utilizes artificial intelligence technology. This means it can understand its own physical parameters and can work out how to get to its destination. The hope is the technology can be used for search and rescue, along with the delivery of parcels. Next up, a Boston startup debuted a line of autonomous cars Tuesday in a contained industrial park in New York. The service will feature a line of 6 autonomous vehicles that will transport passengers from the privately run industrial park at its Cumberland Gate to a newly installed gate of the New York City Ferry. The ferry connects Brooklyn with Manhattan. Set apart from the rest of New York City, the Navy Yard has been used before as a testing ground for shared bike systems and drones. Optimus Ride is also planning on deploying lines in Greater Washington, D.C., Massachusetts, and California. And finally, virtual reality headsets could one day be an addition to surgical gowns and face masks in operating rooms, with a new virtual reality guided catheter that gives surgeons an immersive look inside the human vascular system. The system, being developed by the University of Washington and a startup, allows doctors to navigate a catheter, a thin, flexible tube used in surgery, with a virtual reality headset that makes them feel as if they're inside a patient's blood vessels. The proof of concept technology still needs to be approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration before it can be used on actual patients. And that's what's trending today.
U.S. President Donald Trump and his wife Melania were greeted by dozens of protesters when they traveled to Dayton, Ohio and El Paso, Texas Wednesday to visit the victims of last weekend's mass shootings. Demonstrators in both cities expressed their anger over the nation's lax regulations on guns and Trump's remarks about immigrants and people of color that have been denounced as racist. VOA's Richard Green has the details.
Shortly before departing the White House for his trips to Ohio and Texas, President Trump once again defended himself against growing criticism that his comments embrace and encourage white nationalism. He went so far as to suggest that the suspected gunman in the Ohio shooting supported his liberal opponents.
So my critics are political people. They're trying to make points. In many cases, they're running for president, and they're very low in the polls. A couple of them in particular, very low in the polls. If you look at Dayton, that was the person that supported, I guess you would say, Bernie Sanders, I understood. Antifa, I understood. Elizabeth Warren, I understood. Had nothing to do with President Trump. So these are people that are looking for political gain. I don't think they're getting it. And as much as possible, I've tried to stay out of that.
The warm greeting Trump received from local dignitaries when he arrived in Dayton was in sharp contrast to the angry protesters that lined the streets outside the hospital, where he and the First Lady visited with some of the 27 people wounded in last Sunday's shooting that left 9 people dead. Ohio Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown says he urged the president to push his Senate Republican allies to take swift action on new gun control legislation already approved in the Democratic-controlled House.
Both the mayor and I asked the president to call on Senator McConnell to bring the Senate back in session this week, to tell the Senate that he wants the background checks bill that has already passed the House, that he wants it on the floor. I asked the president to promise to me and to the American people that he will sign that bill after he's spoken out in support of it with Senator McConnell.
In El Paso, where 22 people were killed at a department store just hours before the Dayton shooting, Trump praised emergency personnel who took part in assisting the victims and capturing the shooter.
All over the world, they're talking about the job you've done as police, as law enforcement, as first responders. The job you've done is incredible, and everybody's talking about it. And I wanted to come and thank you, because you're very special people.
But emotions also ran high in El Paso, which sits on the border with Mexico. The suspected gunman in that attack, Patrick Crucius, reportedly posted a white supremacist message online hours before the shooting that expressed intense hatred towards Hispanics. Many El Paso residents blame the president's rhetoric and his policies against undocumented immigrants from Mexico and other Central American countries.
These hate-filled policies are enacted right here in our community every day. This attack and everyone before it has been an assault on our right to exist. Today, on a day when our community is still in shock, still in mourning, and still recovering from this white supremacist terrorist attack, because that's what it is. On a day when Latinx communities across the country are afraid that they may be next. Today of all days, we must hold the president accountable for the pattern of racism that has defined his administration.
We have a president who demonizes communities like this one.
Among those criticizing Trump's visit Wednesday was Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke, who formerly represented El Paso in Congress. The president blasted O'Rourke on Twitter before arriving in El Paso, mocking him for his low standing in the polls and accusing him of faking Hispanic heritage. Richard Green, VOA News, Washington.
Well, Kentucky native Kelly Knight Craft will be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations after winning confirmation by a slim majority in the Senate. Some Democrats complained about her lack of foreign policy experience, heading into a senior diplomatic post. VOA's UN correspondent Margaret Bashir has more.
Craft is a third-generation Kentuckian, the granddaughter of tobacco farmers and a former businesswoman. She and her husband Joe, a billionaire coal executive, are well known in Republican circles as major donors, having contributed to several Senate campaigns and donating $1 million to Trump's 2016 presidential run. Trump appointed her as his envoy to Canada less than 2 years ago. Her tenure there was marked by the negotiations for the new U.S.-Canada-Mexico trade agreement. Other than that brief posting, she has no foreign policy experience, a point Democratic senators seized on at her June confirmation hearing.
So, Madam Ambassador, let me be frank. I have deep reservations about your lack of qualifications for such a complex and challenging role. Historically, U.S. ambassadors to the UN have brought significant executive experience or experience working directly in foreign policy.
Menendez also questioned her extensive absences from her post in Canada. More than half of her 608 days on the job.
I find this staggering amount of time away from posts very troubling and an abdication of leadership.
Despite criticism, longtime UN observer Richard Gowan tells VOA that Craft can likely handle the job.
Craft doesn't have a strong history in multilateral diplomacy, but that was also true of her predecessor, Nikki Haley. And I think expectations for Craft are low, but actually she may be able to win friends amongst US allies at the UN if she's willing to work in a collegial fashion.
One of the UN's top priorities is slowing global warming. Craft has come under scrutiny for her views on climate change. Her family has ties to the coal industry, and she once told a Canadian interviewer that she believes both sides of the climate debate.
Climate change needs to be addressed as it poses real risk to our planet. Human behavior has contributed to the changing climate, let there be no doubt. I will take this matter seriously, and if confirmed, I will be an advocate for all countries to do their part in addressing climate change.
As Kraft replaces Nikki Haley, who quit the post 7 months ago. Haley held cabinet rank, which Kraft will not, and cultivated a high political profile. Analysts say Kraft is likely to have a more limited role than Haley in setting U.S. foreign policy. Margaret Bashir, VOA News, the United Nations.
Well, 60% of the world's cocoa production comes from two countries in West Africa, Ghana and Ivory Coast. The two nations are now working to increase farmers' incomes though farmers say a lot more needs to be done. Stacey Knott reports.
Emmanuel Nojo has been growing cocoa for 20 years to support his family. But like most cocoa farmers in Ghana, he struggles to make ends meet.
We need cocoa buying companies to support farmers. But when they ask for money from cocoa buying companies, they say no, they don't give pre-financing.
In Ghana, 800,000 households rely on cocoa. The cost of growing cocoa is high, and prices are dictated by a government agency based on the global market. The result is that farmers are often left with low incomes. Adding to their plight, many farmers do not own the land where they plant, making their future uncertain. Lifelong cocoa farmer David Servor has been told the land he farms on might soon be sold.
Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire are West African countries who helps in cocoa. By listening to the news, I've not been hearing Cote d'Ivoire is selling their lands to people to be doing different things. But always Ghana is selling their lands, destroying our cocoa farms. How do we have future in this?
Ghana and Ivory Coast this year discussed forcing a minimum purchase price on cocoa buyers. But they pulled back from the plan in July, instead adding a $400 living income differential for every ton of beans that farmers produce. Ghana's cocoa industry regulator says improving farmers' incomes is crucial to keep them growing the beans.
Farmers feel that they've not been rewarded enough for their efforts. It's a major threat to the survival of the cocoa industry in Ghana.
Authorities say the new fee will help farmers earn a minimum price per tonne and pay more to cocoa farmers like Nojo. However, Nojo says it may not be enough.
They are mention of $2,600 for, I think, 1 ton and this thing. To me, they can give more than that.
Well, and that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us in Washington, have a good evening.